In a place like Newfoundland, there are a lot of really interesting stories, and a lot of these stories were never recorded properly. There's not a great record of many of the most unbelievable events that have taken place in Newfoundland over the centuries. And this is just my opinion, but there's one story that stands out as the most significant, most amazing story that I'm aware of in all of Newfoundland history, and most people don't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it until the last couple of years, and I'm in my mid-40s. And that says something. This is a story that should be, common knowledge amongst all Newfoundlanders. It should be a folk legend, and I just really don't think enough people know about it. For the sake of brevity for this video, as I said, I'm keeping everything very high level. I'm not even going to tell you anything about the story. I'm going to put a link in the description to a resource from a gentleman named Robert. He runs a really cool resource called Product of Newfoundland. It's a blog, and he has a YouTube channel and really cool Instagram page. He covers this in pretty good detail. It really makes you feel what happened. So I'm saying I'm keeping this brief, and I'm talking on and on about it. I want to plant the seed. It's the Harvey family, Anne Harvey, her father, her brother, and her dog, Harry Man, which in itself is worthy of being the most interesting story. What they did back in the 1840s, it's unbelievable that this is not common knowledge in Newfoundland. So please take a moment after you finish watching the video, complete the video, please. Go check that link in the description and learn more about Anne Harvey, what she did, and just be amazed. Now, with that said, the Harvey gravesite exists in the town of Isle on the southwest coast, and Anne herself isn't there. Her remains lie somewhere else. She moved to Port aux Basques after she got married, but she grew up in the town of Isle with her family, and you can visit the gravesite of the Harvey family. It's such a cool story, and I just hope more people learn about this and remember the name Anne Harvey and the Harvey family into the future. Leo's is the best. It just is. Every time I go there, I leave happy. The fish is perfect. The chips are perfect. The dressing, the gravy, the tables, the chairs, the clean but otherwise untouched decor from the 1970s, 1960s maybe. The spooky, narrow hallway to get to the bathroom. Everything perfect. Feel free to disagree, but the reason Leo stands out for me is that it's a legitimately nostalgic look back into St. John's history, with an absolutely delicious main offering, fish and chips, that makes it all make sense. And to top it all off, the service there is just like you've been invited into a friend's house for supper. They take care of you in a genuine way. If you make YouTube videos, they recognize you. Yep, they recognized me. Yep, that made me feel pretty cool. But in this case, it was kind of like having your hero tell you, nice job, way to go. You know what I mean? So Leo's is just the best place in Newfoundland for a feed of fish and chips. I don't think I can explain it any better than that. There are Terry Fox memorials in a number of Canadian cities and towns, as there should be. And this one is quietly significant. Terry Fox is remembered as arguably the greatest Canadian of all time. Of course, the word greatest is subjective, but what he set out to do has inspired an entire country for multiple generations. He inspired us to try. This memorial is significant because this is the site where Terry started his journey. It was where he dipped his prosthetic leg into the Atlantic. It's a little fanfare, but what he would inspire has been continuing now for more than 4 decades. This video is full of touching memorials and impressive monuments to important and historic Newfoundlanders, but this particular one should make the entire country of Canada proud. I was not ready for this. This is probably my favorite place in Newfoundland that I've ever seen so far, and I was not expecting that to happen at all. There's a lot more I can say about the specifics of what makes Harbour Breton so beautiful, but the reason I think why it stands out as the most beautiful town in Newfoundland for me partially owes itself to the surprise, the shock that I felt when I was there. I just wasn't ready for it to be as impressive as it was. I knew there were fjords around the south coast, and the fjords of Harbour Breton were just breathtaking. It wasn't hard for me to single out Harbour Breton as my #1 most beautiful town in Newfoundland. What was hard was not including the nearby town of Galtis, or on the other side, the nearby town of Belorem, into this list as well. But if you use Harbour Breton as your home base, as I did on my venture to that area, you're still able to visit these other communities that are definitely worthy of being on this list, but I don't know who I would remove to include them, so I left them alone and just used Harbour Breton because they were the clear #1 for me as the key destination for you to focus on if you're actually going to make a trip like this happen.
I finally just got my breath. I drove down to Harbour Breton today for the first time in my life, not really knowing what to expect at all. And like I've said this kind of about a few other places, but I have no problem saying it again. I am completely blown away. Completely, my breath has been taken. I'm in shock and whatever expression you want to use. I had no idea that Harbour Breton was like this. So I'm here for a couple of days. I'm going to get around and explore the whole area as well, not just the town of Harbour Breton. But unfortunately for me, I didn't take more time to do this because I set myself up in Harbour Breton as a home base. And I wanted to do all that exploring, but I really wish I gave myself a couple more days to just stay in the town. It's so much bigger than I realized. I was not ready for this.
I really wanted to get back to Harbour Breton in the summer, or at least when the weather's better. I do hope to make it back to Harbour Breton in a different season so I can see a different face of it and maybe see some of the other activities and festivals and things that go on, which, as I'm told, there are plenty. Atlantic Canada, the East Coast in general, there's a lot of iconic lighthouses around. So if you're interested in lighthouses, you can travel around many different parts of the island and see some really cool ones. They often look different from one another. And one of the interesting things about lighthouses, of course, by nature, they exist to protect ships from slamming into rocky coastlines. So if you venture out to where lighthouses are, you'll see some of the most spectacular coastline areas of the island of Newfoundland. My favorite lighthouse on the island of Newfoundland that I have seen, no question, is the lighthouse at Rose Blanche. This is a one-of-a-kind lighthouse. There's nothing else quite like it in the province. And to be fair, it was reconstructed, so the authenticity is there. It's definitely a monument to the lighthouse that was there originally. But the lighthouse that was built in 1873, I believe, operated for about 70 years. Then it was abandoned. From the 1940s till about the 1980s, it just deteriorated. And in the mid-90s, the lighthouse was completely restored, built according to the way that it was determined that it was built in the past. And the resulting lighthouse that exists today, that is functioning, is absolutely breathtaking. The town of Rose Blanche is a fairly remote town. It's accessible by vehicle. So if you're on the southwest corner of the province, you're in the town of Port aux Basques. For a lot of people, this is the gateway to leave or to enter Newfoundland by ferry. And the instinct for many people is, if you're not staying in Port aux Basques, you're going to drive north up the Trans-Canada Highway to wherever you're going. But instead of driving north up the Trans-Canada Highway, you head east on Route 470. You're going to come into the southwest coast to some of the most beautiful towns in all of Newfoundland. This is the area that was devastated by Hurricane Fiona in 2022. I haven't been back since before the storm, so I'm not sure how the towns are faring in terms of rebuilding from the destruction. Some of the towns were hit really hard. Burnt Islands, Isle of Mort, I know they were hit pretty bad. I'm not sure how Rose Blanche fared, and I haven't heard anything specifically about the lighthouse being damaged significantly. So hopefully everything is safe where you can actually travel into the lighthouse to see it. But if you can, do it. Now, when it comes to iconic town signs in Newfoundland, there's a lot of them. A lot of them have been popping up over the last little while. I don't know if it's a new phenomenon or it's just something I haven't noticed before. But you can travel around and just sort of make a note, see if you can find town signs. Now, I don't think they're everywhere. There's a lot of towns that have these cool little signs, and I particularly like them. I don't know if they're exciting for you, if they're boring, but they're pretty and they're unique and they just add something to your trip. You got the iconic dildo sign, which is kind of what sparked this in my mind. And then a lot of other places started putting up wooden ones, colorful, not colorful, whatever the case is. But if you're traveling around, look for them. And in particular, my two favorite signs are the two I Love Newfoundland signs that I saw on the West Coast, one in Deer Lake at the airport and one at Port aux Basques, kind of just after you come off the ferry. But of course, they're a little different, but they still sort of fit into the theme of the town signs. When we were kids, Bowring Park was the city park that we spent the most time at. Growing up in Mount Pearl, it was basically just down the road. I remember looking forward to seeing all of these statues, especially the caribou and Peter Pan down by the ducks. I never knew the significance of any of these statues back then. I just liked seeing them. There are a number of smaller statues and monuments as well, kind of sprinkled around the park, and there's a cantilever bridge in the park that holds historical significance. The Caribou Memorial was spruced up in recent years, and it's really impressive. There's a large plaque honoring those Newfoundlanders lost in the wars of the 20th century, which includes the name of my great uncle who never came back from the front during World War I. The Fighting Newfoundlander is poignant and powerful as well. You also have the Peter Pan statue, which is itself a memorial to Betty Munn, a 3-year-old girl who was part of the Bowring family who lost her life in the SS Florizel disaster, a boat that sank just off the coast of Newfoundland. In February of 1918, the SS Florizel ran aground at Hornhead, just off the coast of Cappahayden. The ship ran up on the rocks close enough to the beach that the fishermen from the area could clearly see the waves crashing over it, but far enough from shore in this late winter storm that was brewing that any kind of assistance was impossible. All these people on land could do was watch for 27 hours until the ocean settled a bit. 94 people lost their lives out on the water, while 44 were eventually saved. It was a complex set of circumstances that ultimately led to this disaster. There is a timeline where if any one of the number of contributing factors leading to this calamity were subtracted from the equation, the beautiful but somber Peter Pan statue in Bowring Park might not exist. Ultimately, Captain Martin gave the order to steer the ship to the west as he thought he was rounding Cape Race. He was barely past Fairyland. This was a fatal mistake for the SS Florizel and for 94 of the souls on board. Had he been able to see the lights from shore that night along the route, there would be no story to tell. Unfortunately, that's not the timeline we live on. The Silent Witness Memorial just outside the town of Gander memorializes a plane that went down carrying American service members who stopped in Gander on a refueling stop coming from Egypt heading back to Kentucky around the holiday season. And there was ice on the wing. It's the first time I ever heard the term ice on the wing. But the plane came down shortly after takeoff, killing everybody on board. And it was a disaster that I remember as a young child. But you can go and visit the site, and it's a really moving place to experience, to actually have your feet on the ground in this place, knowing what happened here in 1985. There's a legend about a song that originated in Newfoundland, and I believe the legend even if I can't find any reliable evidence to back it up. Ron Hynes was the man of 1,000 songs. Apparently, in Ireland, there's a large swath of the music appreciating public who has no idea that Ron's most famous song, Sonny's Dream, originated on our shores, not theirs. It's a great song. We were lucky to have Ron. He grew up in Fairyland, and the people of Fairyland honored him with a really nice memorial a couple of years ago. There's another well-visited statue on George Street as well that includes Ron on it, but the one in Fairyland is my favorite of the two. The visionary behind Smuggler's Cove, Tom Hollett, is remembered as much more than a local businessman or philanthropist. He was a presence, a man who truly believed in the potential that exists here in the Buren area. With strong family roots in the area dated back to the 1800s, Tom worked to preserve heritage, culture, and the magic of his home. A lover and celebrator of our history and the tall tales that surround it, Tom dreamt of bringing that magic to life and sharing it with the rest of the world. Unfortunately, Tom's life was tragically cut short, but his legacy lives on here at Smuggler's Cove. In the town of Badger in central Newfoundland, you have the Badger Memorial. This is a memorial to a police officer who was killed in the line of duty, and also to the loggers who were striking for better conditions. The conditions of workers in Newfoundland in the early part of the 20th century were terrible. So these men were fighting for better conditions, and unfortunately one of them took it upon themselves to crack a policeman over the head with a big piece of wood, killing him. So it was just a disaster all around. But the memorial is there. It's an important place for Newfoundlanders to visit and to remember this event. There's a lot to be said for the town of Fleur-de-Lis, and I'm going to leave that for another video because it deserves the proper attention, proper respect. It's kind of well known in the province of Newfoundland for a big incident that happened over 20 years ago now, in 2000, and I focused on one particular location in the town with the video shoot this time around to introduce this place, Sam's Place, Samantha's at Saltwater, Joy's Cafe, Museum. I'm going to get into it in much more detail in another video. But for now, if you're interested in learning about the incident that I'm talking about in Fleur-de-Lis, take a minute and do a quick Google search. You'll find something from Christmas 2000, sort of associated with the town of Fleur-de-Lis, a beautiful town at the top of the road coming into the Bayford Peninsula. Now, I grew up in Mount Pearl, and on the Avalon, riffs isn't a thing, but basically everywhere else around the island of Newfoundland, I think there's one or two locations in Labrador as well, riffs is everywhere. And it's in the last 3-4 years when I've really been making an effort to travel around and see more of Newfoundland that I noticed that riffs is everywhere. And this isn't my idea. I can't claim to have created this idea myself, but I've seen it come up in stories in recent years where people have taken on the riffs challenge to get around and see and visit every single riffs location in Newfoundland. No, if you're from the Avalon, riffs is kind of like Piper's, or if you're from somewhere else in Canada, you know, if you remember Honest Ed's in Toronto, or Army Navy surplus stores like Army Navy in Vancouver and Edmonton, the SAAN, SAN, I guess you would say it, in like rural Western Canada, it's a surplus Army and Navy, I think. Anyway, it's a type of store, it's a discount department store, but it's the type of store where you can get everything. And the fact that they are in maybe 20 locations around Newfoundland, in small towns, but kind of like in the service centers of different districts, right? So if you're trying to cover as much ground in Newfoundland as you can use riffs as your anchor points. The sealing industry in Newfoundland played a really, really important role in our history. There were two events related to the sealing industry in Newfoundland. In 1914, on March 30th and 31st that took place, that resulted in the loss of 251 lives. And in Elliston, a major sealing town, they have a beautiful memorial set up to commemorate the lives lost. In particular, 2 lives, Reuben and Albert John Crew. And the story is very detailed, but just to quickly highlight these 2 men, they were a father and son duo that were out on the ice, and they perished, and as the story goes, holding each other, and the memorial statue that's there in Elliston reflects apparently how the two men were actually found. Cavendish Square is an example of one of these places that the city kind of just grew around. Did you even know there's a place called Cavendish Square in downtown St. John's? Today, it's that little island of land between the Newfoundland Hotel, or the Sheraton, and Baymen Brewery. There's some parking spots around what's there now, and not much else. But it used to be a fairly important square for the city back in the day. There's a monument there dedicated to a woman named Ethel Dickinson. Ethel was a volunteer nurse, and she gave up her life a little over 100 years ago tending to the sick during the last big pandemic that hit the world before COVID. I thought there might be a wave of awareness focused on this real hero from our city's past during COVID, but aside from a few posts on social media and maybe a story or two in the news, there really wasn't much. I still don't think many people know who Ethel Dickinson was, what she did, that there's a beautiful monument dedicated to her that stands in a fairly busy corner of St. John's to this very day. The monument's pretty overgrown with trees today, but it's definitely there. And what about Fred? Do you know who Fred is? In high school, my friend Caitlin used to bring me to the all-ages shows at the Loft and the LSPU Hall. It was at the hall where this man's presence was felt. I don't remember him being very big, but his personality sure was.
Fred was a pillar in the arts community, and I met him when I was a teenager. I'd come down to the LSPU Hall, which I'm going to take you up these stairs to have a quick look at the place. They used to have all ages shows for kind of, alternative rock, punk rock, and just basically local musicians that formed a scene that hasn't really been replicated since. Going back now to my high school days in the mid-90s, I haven't seen anything quite like it kind of happen again. So there's the LSPU Hall. There's other places, other venues where they would have shows as well, but this was the main place. Like, any big shows happened here. There was the Loft, there was Cornerstone actually used to have some all-ages shows, and bands like Potbelly and Bung, and later Potmaster, Potato Bug, Liz Band, lots of others, Chevy, Ched. Good to Go was my favorite, even though the singer kind of hated me. The drummer was a childhood friend of mine, but there was lots of really great music, and Fred was kind of the glue behind the scene.
The hall shows were my touch point with him as a teenager, but he organized much more than just the all-ages shows at the LSPU Hall. Music NL does amazing work today for local artists, and I don't want to take anything away from what they do, but that indie scene of the 90s was special, and Fred's role in that moment of time was enormous.
This mural has been around for a few years, and it actually replaced another one that was around for like 25 years. It's really pretty impressive that it lasts for that long, and everybody walks by this now for like literally 30 years, and people don't really know who Fred is. So just want to tell you a little bit about who the man is, who he was.
Fred passed away in 1995. It was a swimming accident. He was only 23 years old, if I'm not mistaken, but he did so much for the Newfoundland music scene. His memory has been protected and celebrated by the people who remember him and knew him well for 30 years now. That's much longer than he was even with us here on Earth. I've created 4 or 5 videos about Twillingate, and one in particular about a very, very important resident of Twillingate who is kind of lost to history. Not really, but she should be more well known, in my opinion. It's Mademoiselle Twillingate, Georgina Sterling. So you can go and visit the Twillingate Museum to find out who she was and visit her memorial site behind the museum where her remains lay. Just an incredible Newfoundland story that I'm hoping more Newfoundlanders will learn about and talk about moving into the future. I just think we should know more about her. I think the story should be shared farther and wider. I think everybody should come to Twillingate for 1,000 reasons, but one of the reasons is this museum, and in particular, that exhibit for Georgina Sterling. And her remains are behind this museum in a graveyard just beyond what you can see over here. And there's a beautiful marker showing where she rests right now. It's great to know that she was able to come home after achieving so much and then quickly kind of falling. And that can be hard on anybody, right? So we can all imagine that. But she made it home. She lived out her life, her later years of her life here in Twillingate, and she remains back in the graveyard behind this museum right now, and in a plot that beautifully memorializes this amazing Newfoundlander in our history. You can do an all around the circle music challenge. It'll take a full day. You can go to Fogo, Twillingate, Morton's Harbor, and if you know, you know. Beyond that, we'll stay with some of the obvious stuff. If you're looking for live music and you're in the St. John's area, you can always hit up George Street for some excellent music. And if you're in town during the specific period of the George Street Festival at the end of July every year, you're really in for something unique and a really good party. There are so many amazing traditional Newfoundland songs that are about individual locations, and you can go and visit these locations, and it just sort of feels cool to do it. Starting, for example, with one of the most beloved Newfoundland songs, Let Me Fish Off Cape St. Mary's. Go to Cape St. Mary's. I'm going to talk about Cape St. Mary's a little bit more in another entry on this video, but you can go stand on the shores of Cape St. Mary's and look out into the water, right? Now this piece right here, this is a bit of a question for you. Do you recognize this wharf? This is a very iconic piece of a song. The song isn't about the wharf, but they mention Clayton's Wharf in my personal favorite Newfoundland song ever recorded, Saltwater Joys by Buddy Wass's Name and the Other Fellers. You can actually go to the actual wharf that Wayne Johnson sings about in this amazing song. Now in New West Valley, you have the town of Brookfield, formerly known as Norton's Cove, and you have Norton's Cove Studio. And I'll let the proprietor of the building who runs the studio now tell you a little bit about why it's such a significant location in the scheme of music in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Lukey's Boat was written by Virtue Kane, or Han, as she was born. Virtue would have been standing behind the counter on a daily basis right where I am. She ran the shop from its inception in 1890 up until her death in 1929. It was built as a general store, back in 1890. Virtue wrote the song and she performed it at the town hall in Brookfield, just right there. The hall is gone now, but when it was there, she was up there and performed Lukey's Boat.
One place that I'll say to go for nice fish and chips is Denver's in CBS, and specifically in Kelligrews. Denver's fits into the music section because it's in Kelligrews, and Kelligrews, of course, the namesake of the amazing Kelligrews Soiree. Sim and I was the group Sim and I, right? Sim Savory are from here in Bloor, super famous for the Lumber Song, Music and Friends. There's a bunch. I mean, they're a classic Newfoundland group. But this is Sim's hometown, right? And last but not least, one place I haven't been to yet, and as many times as I've been on the Bonavista Peninsula, I've never made it over to Tickle Cove Pond. Tickle Cove Pond being the namesake of one of my favorite Newfoundland songs. If you're talking about exploring Newfoundland and trying as many fish and chips places as you can, or checking out all the lighthouses, or hitting up all the riffs, you're covering a lot of ground. But if you want to complete a little challenge but do it all in one town, the best example I can think of is go to Botwood, and you can try to find every single one of the beautiful murals that exist around town. There's not like any hidden or anything. It's not a huge town, but it does take a little bit of effort to get around and spot all of the different murals around town. And you can talk to the folks at the Botwood Mural Arts Society. I think it's Trudy Stuckless, if she's still the person who runs that. She's very, very helpful. You can get maps. You can actually do tours with like a guided tour during the peak tourism season. But even without that, you can still get around and try to see all the murals. And really sort of unexpected. So you go to Botwood. That's a challenge that you can undertake in one single town and do it in a single day.
Wow. I gotta shift this. Get in there. Wow.
Well, it'll soon be time to wake up, guys. You're just dreaming.
There's lots of wildlife in Newfoundland. Whales are something that really stood out for me and my experiences. You can take whale watching tours, pay a few dollars, get on a boat and go out into the water, and whales will come up and dance with you in the boats. You can stand up on cliffs in places like Twillingate and watch the whales down in the water below just doing their thing. It's amazing. Then you got seabirds. You got the Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve, which I briefly mentioned earlier in this video for the music section. The amount of birds, the cacophony of the song that you'll hear, it's just unbelievable to experience. And then, of course, you have places like Elliston, again, down in Bay Bulls where the whale watching tours are, where you have amazing puffin colonies, and you can get up close and personal with some of the most beautiful little birds that you can ever imagine. Wildlife in Newfoundland is really, really special. One note I'm going to mention is, for the love of God, be careful on the roads. There's a lot of moose in Newfoundland, and there's a lot of accidents, and a moose accident is not a good accident, so be careful, especially when it's dark at all. Take care on the roads, okay? Tommy Ricketts was 15 years old when he signed up with the Newfoundland Regiment. He lied about his age. You had to be 18 to join. A year after enlisting, at 16, he was set to head over to fight in France and Belgium during the First World War. Ricketts saw a lot of action over the nearly 2 years spent on the front. During one battle in particular, on October 14th, 1918, Tommy Ricketts became a legend. Tommy, through his selfless actions on that day, is credited with enabling his platoon to safely advance on the enemy. For his bravery, Tommy was awarded the Victoria Cross. This is the highest award for military valor in the British Commonwealth. At 17 and a half years of age, he was the youngest recipient of this award in that war. Today there's a monument to Tommy on the site where he operated a pharmacy until his passing in 1967 on the corner of Water Street and Job Street. That building was demolished shortly after Tommy's death. By all accounts, Tommy was painfully shy and private for his whole life. It has been written that he never felt comfortable with the public recognition. It's hard not to admire this amazing Newfoundlander, but it seems like he never wanted that. The great auk was a bird. That's right, was. Apparently their feathers were super soft or something, so it totally makes sense that they were worth wiping off the face of the earth, right? There's a poignant monument to the great auk at the end of a beautiful hike on Jobat's Point on Fogo Island. That's where they lived. This statue faces an identical one over in Iceland. They lived there too, but they don't now.
So it's basically like a conversation starter or like a research starter, so you can learn more about what that statue represents, what the great auk is/was. In grade school, we would learn that this bird used to exist in Newfoundland and now it's gone, but that was the extent of it. So I'm no expert, I don't know everything about it. What we do know is that they're gone, and it's because of people, and because of greed, and because of stupidity.
With Brimstone Head, one of the most unique rock formations that I'm aware of anywhere. You can hike to the top of Brimstone Head, which is known as one of the four corners of the flat earth, and relax by. It's a bit of a joke, bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's pretty cool that they have that there. You can look down on the island from there, and it's really, really nice. You of course have the iconic fjords at Western Brook Pond in Gross Mourne. I, for some reason, traveled out there in the winter, trudging through about 2 feet of snow. I was the only person in the vicinity of the place within miles and miles, but really cool place to witness. You have beaches in Newfoundland, and in my opinion, Lumsden Beach is the most beautiful beach I've ever seen. Now, I haven't been to Burgeo, and Sandbanks Park is supposed to be absolutely beautiful as well. But these are the sort of sandy beaches that you think of when you think of beaches. But you also have big sort of rocky pebble beaches like Topsail Beach, which is just outside the St. John's city limits. And it's not the type of place to sit on the sand and dig your toes in, but it's a place to bring some lawn chairs and bring your family and have a nice cookout on a nice summer evening. Beautiful, beautiful sight. Maybe not as comfortable as the soft sand, but still very, very enjoyable. And just outside the town of Bonavista, you have some really cool rock formations like the Dungeon and the Dungeon Provincial Park. And then just beyond that, you have Spiller's Cove Sea Stack. Again, they're really close to the town of Bonavista. Really worth the effort to just take that extra 10 or 15 minute drive to see these cool rock formations. And finally, the icon of icons when it comes to tourism in the spring in Newfoundland, it's the icebergs. The icebergs come through in the spring. They last some years right up until early summer, but it's amazing to see these huge chunks of ice that crack off from glaciers that were formed tens of thousands of years ago. If you want to feel something on your trips, you can check out some of these memorials. I'm going to start in the beautiful town of Harbour Breton. We have the Hickey Family Memorial. Please take a minute and then Google the Hickey, the landslide in Harbour Breton from 1972, I believe. You can pay your respects at the site where the Hickey House once stood. The National War Memorial in St. John's is one of 2 national war memorials in the country of Canada because it was unveiled when Newfoundland was its own country. Beautiful restoration took place in 2024 where they unveiled the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and it's an amazing memorial that many people kind of know something about because it's prominently located in the center of downtown St. John's. Did you know that Newfoundland was attacked in World War II? Twice? In 1942, 2 separate torpedo strikes by German U-boats in North American waters, 2 of the very few direct attacks on North America, resulted in very close to 100 total lives lost. In the waters around and a wharf attached to Bell Island. Bell Island was an important source of iron ore at the time, and the attacks are thought to have had the purpose of disrupting the supply of iron ore to Canada. There's a memorial called the Seamen's Memorial, and it's dedicated to those who were lost on those days in September and November 1942, but also to those who jumped in to help the survivors. Bell Island has an amazing history. It's home to one of Newfoundland's best fish and chip spots, which I have to mention has been around longer than Jess's. There's just lots of reasons to hop across the Tickle. This memorial is worth a visit. You have the town of Galtus, which is a town that is probably not going to exist in another decade or so from now. And if it does exist, it's not going to be serviced by government services, most likely.
Morning.
Going into Bonavista, I picked 3 towns to highlight because you can visit all 3 of them on one quick day if you're visiting the Bonavista Peninsula. You have beautiful Trinity, which has received some serious investment in like infrastructure repairs over the years, so it's really something to behold. You have Champneys West, an active fishing community that has an active harbor.
Do you mind if I get you in a shot? Yeah. Thanks.
I'm all over the world.
And it's the most beautiful little corner of the entire province. And that's arguable, I guess, but it's one of the most beautiful corners of the entire province. And then you have Port Union. It's the only union-built town in Canada. I'm keeping this high level. Like I said, Google it. Port Union, Google William Coker and the FPU, okay? Very interesting towns. The Heart's Content Cable Station. It's a historically significant building that is related, of course, to the first transatlantic cable signal coming from across the Atlantic into North America. Heart's Content is a cool little town in any case, but if you're there, stop in and try to see the station. Every time I've been to Heart's Content, I try to get in, but it's always closed. I get there either on a Sunday or after hours, so the door's always locked. I haven't been inside the station, but just seeing it from the outside was still pretty impressive for me. You might know a bit about the legend of Amelia Earhart, but did you know that Newfoundland plays an important part in her story? Oh, you did? Well, did you know that there's a beautiful monument to Amelia in Harbour Grace, Newfoundland? Sort of. It was over on a park next to where the Kyle ran aground, and the SS Kyle itself is a memorial in its own right. But anyways, the skeets are out in full force. They cut the statue down and haul her away. It was a story that everyone had their eyes on for a while. They found Amelia, the statue that is. It was cut up and left in the woods. It'll be repaired and placed back on her pedestal when she's ready. Down the west coast, just as you enter the Port-au-Port Peninsula, you have the Our Lady of Mercy Heritage Church. It's the largest wooden structure that still exists in Newfoundland. They've gone through some major upgrades recently. If you head down around Stephenville, which I mentioned in an earlier section, travel a little bit further in past the town, you'll cross into the amazing Port-au-Port Peninsula, and you'll come across this church within a couple of minutes, and it's worth the effort to get out and see. In the town of Grand Bank, you have a very interesting looking building. It's the Fisherman's Museum. It's a couple of triangle shaped buildings. It's a beautiful monument to the history of Newfoundland's greatest industry, the fishery. Just outside the town of Twillingate, in the town of Herring Neck, this old sort of rundown building, this is an example of one of these things that you may notice if you're in the area, but you may not know the history of it. This has an incredible history. It was the site of one of the most important events, in my opinion, that has ever taken place in Newfoundland. Please go ahead and Google it if you want. It's the Loyal Orange Lodge in the town of Herring Neck, related to the FPU. That's the event that I feel that this is a very important building because of. This is the Colonial Building, a historical building where so many interesting things have happened over the years. Before the Confederation Building was built, this was the seat of government in Newfoundland. So there's a lot of interesting events that have taken place at the Colonial Building. But just on face value, it's a beautiful building. So go see the Colonial Building if you're in St. John's. It's on Military Road. Overlooking St. John's is Cabot Tower, sitting high above Signal Hill. But Cabot Tower itself is a cool building with an interesting history that really, when it was built, probably shouldn't have been built. I'll leave that for another video. I'm very glad that it does exist, but it's just kind of one of those situations where at that time when it was being planned and built, there were far greater needs in the city. Think the Great Fire of 1892, but I digress. It's a beautiful building, and if you're in the city of St. John's, you're going to see it almost from anywhere you are. So now you know what it is. I've talked about some of the statues and monuments in Bowring Park and how I'm partial to that park for sentimental reasons. Well, Bannerman Park is another one of St. John's gems, and I really enjoy it too. It's much smaller than Bowring Park, but it makes up for its smaller size with its incredible history. Today, it's home to a few beautiful statues that, while recently installed for the most part, they pay tribute to the city's rich history. The Homecoming, for example, is touching. It pays further tribute to Newfoundland's military heritage. And just this year, a new statue was unveiled honoring Armine Nutting-Gosling, one of Newfoundland's most prominent suffragists. Now, it's not fair to reduce this woman's life to one initiative, just as it isn't right to reduce any of the stories of this video down to like 1 or 2 minute snippets, but the purpose here is to plant seeds for you to dig deeper on any of these topics or people or stories that you are interested in. The unveiling of this statue of Armin Nutting Gosling did just that for me. Now, this is a person I was familiar with, but since her name has been in the news a bit more this year because of the statue, I read up a bit more about her. And her story is far more interesting than simply focusing on a single, albeit important, goal. This was a person who spent a lifetime fighting for just change. This culminated in helping earn 4 women of Newfoundland the right to vote, but her story is more than even this remarkable achievement. I know this because the statue in Baymen Park inspired me to learn more about this person from our history.
Now, I'm not really into creepy crawlies, generally speaking, but the insectarium was a really cool experience. It's a place to go if you have kids. They'll have a blast there, most likely. It's basically a museum of bugs, but it's very well put together and very well built. I gotta say, I was impressed by it. I didn't really know what to expect, but there was more to it than I thought there was going to be, and they definitely did a really good job of putting this project together. Now, Joey's Head. I know the place itself is called Joey's Lookout, and there's a beautiful lookout there, and I don't want to knock that, but I will say that there's so many beautiful lookouts around Newfoundland. The reason why I want you to pull over on the highway into the parking lot where Joey's Head is because of Joey's Head. It's a remarkable homage to this megalomaniac that you're going to have Joey's Lookout being overshadowed by this weird picture of this weird man's weird head.
Harvey Road melds into Military Road. This stretch skirts the top of downtown St. John's. In my mind, it's the boundary of downtown. I've never heard anyone refer to this area as Uptown, but for these streets, along with the neighborhoods in their general vicinity, you could think of it like that. There's so much history along this stretch of the city. Where these two streets meet, you have the rooms in the Basilica, prominent buildings sharing what is arguably the most prominent seat in town. Traveling east along Military Road, you come through historic Rollins Cross before passing by Baymen Park, which you're going to hear a bit more about in this video. And then there's the old colonial building, which is situated right on the Baymen Park grounds. With all of these points of interest, you'd be forgiven if you didn't notice the large obelisk monument along Military Road on the grounds of Government House at the head of Cochrane Street. This is a monument to a young man named Fred Weston Carter, who drowned while trying to rescue 2 girls who had fallen through the ice while skating up at Dead Man's Pond in 1869. Beyond the information inscribed on the plaque, it has not been easy to find more detail about this incident, but it appears that this memorial was unveiled in 1871, making it the longest standing memorial of the kind I'm talking about here in this video in the whole city that I'm aware of. The first colony that was attempted in Newfoundland's history was at a place called Cupper's Cove, today known as Cupid's. It's a cute little town right next to Brigus, pretty much, which I also mentioned in this video, by the way. It's a cute little town, pretty much right next to Brigus, which I'm also going to talk about in this video. John Guy is credited as the leader of a small group of men who came to these shores to set up shop and try to make a go of it. The experiment failed after a few years of trying, but today we have an archaeological site where we're able to learn about what these folks tried to do 400 years ago. And we also have this beautiful monument.
Smuggler's Cove in the town, or just outside the town of Burin on the Burin Peninsula. I have made a full video about the place. Go pay a visit. If you are on a road trip around the Burin Peninsula, this is what this place is for. It's an authentic roadhouse with an excellent restaurant, a cool location. Smuggler's Cove. I can't say enough good things about it.
My granddad used to live on Gower Street, the house where my mom essentially grew up in. We would visit every single week, driving in from Mount Pearl. When we reached downtown, there was a checkpoint we would always drive past that I noticed every single time as a kid. It's located in another one of those wacky intersections, but I never took the time to actually learn what this monument was until like 2 years ago. And I always knew it was a war memorial of sorts, but with the big one down on Duckworth, I never knew what this one was. It's the big memorial in an area known as Veterans Square in the middle of the ecclesiastical district, and it's called the Sergeant's Memorial. This monument actually preceded the big National War Memorial by about 3 years. It was unveiled in 1921 and was the first memorial to the Great War built in St. John's. Remembrance Day and Memorial Day services in St. John's typically involve a smaller ceremony here, and participants march to the National War Memorial for the bigger service from this one. For me, the Sergeant's Memorial has always been impressive, but it's one of those things that kind of turn into background scenery. I'm happy that I know more about the significance of this little garden and the monument that stands in there now.
This one's kind of easy. Jelly Bean Row. There's nothing like this that I know of in Canada on the scale that this is on. And it's not the only seaside town in the world that has brightly colored houses, but there's still something unique about the St. John's downtown with Jelly Bean Row. Definitely noticeable if you're in the city, of course, in the downtown area. So walk around one of the many brightly colored row house streets in St. John's. There's not an individual row of Jelly Bean houses. It's just what we call the brightly colored downtown district of St. John's. Gander Airport you may know because of the famous Come From Away story, and rightly so. But I'm putting the Gander Airport in this section here because I just really like the building, the main waiting room area, which was built a long time ago. This was actually one of the most important airports in the world for a time, but they've kind of restored the main waiting room area to reflect what it used to look like, and it's just such a nice place. It just kind of looks like you've stepped back in a movie from the 1950s or 60s, the way that airports are portrayed in those old movies. The town of Brigus is a must-see. It's a true standout on an island full of standouts. Bob Bartlett was a sea captain who, for a time, was one of the world's most famous explorers. He was busy with regular Arctic adventures at a time when the thought of exploring the Arctic wasn't much more realistic than the idea of traveling to the moon was. There are markers honoring Bartlett all over Brigus. There's a monument that was installed by the federal government. There's Hawthorne Cottage, which has a rich history, in part being credited as Bartlett's residence when he was in Brigus. There's the tunnel, which is associated with the Bartlett name, though not Bob specifically. But my favorite monument to the man was the one that was erected by friends. The Argentia Ferry. So this is a seasonal ferry. It runs from, there's no hard dates annually, but it depends on weather. That runs from about mid-June through mid to late September every year. And the ferry run to Port aux Basques leaves from Cape Breton Island from North Sydney. It's the same starting point for the Argentia ferry, but it's a much longer route. I believe it's like an 18-hour haul. I'll put the actual numbers for the different runs in the video here because I forgot to check that before I started talking here. But it's a significantly longer run, but it brings you significantly closer to St. John's. It brings you to the Avalon Peninsula. Brings you to the port of Argentia, which is very close to the town of Placentia. So let's talk about that for a moment. Let's say that you're arriving to the island of Newfoundland through the port of Argentia. So from there, some of the obvious routes would be to head over to St. John's. You're about a little over an hour drive away, well, depending on traffic. Let's say about an hour drive from the Argentia ferry terminal to the city of St. John's. But you're also at that port,
you're very close to the town, like very close to the town of Placentia. You're minutes away from the town of Placentia, which is a beautiful little unique Newfoundland town, and you'll see here in the images there's just nothing else in Newfoundland that quite looks like the town of Placentia, and there's a very deep history in the town as well. So one of the most interesting histories in Newfoundland, which you will find a little bit more on through some of my other videos. But for now, let me just entice you by saying that it's a very historically rich town with a pretty landscape, and you're not going to find much like it anywhere else in the province. If you head south from Placentia, you're on what's called the Cape Shore, and you have a lovely hilly coastal drive that leads you down as far as a town called St. Bride's, which has a beautiful history, and it's also linked to the greatest basketball player who's ever played from Newfoundland, who was a hair away from making it to the NBA. But it's a cool little town. Looks like, from what I'm told, it looks like a lot of coastal Irish towns. This isn't the Irish Loop, it's the Cape Shore Drive, but it's close to the Irish Loop, which I'll get to in a moment. But St. Bride's is also the town that's closest to the amazing St. Mary's Ecological Reserve, with the undescribable bird sanctuary that you just have to be there to experience it to understand how amazing it is. The drive around from St. Bride's through the Cape Shore, coming up through this very south coast on that side of the Avalon Peninsula and Cape St. Mary's itself, you're going to come to the town of Branch, another absolute unsung hero, a beautiful sort of stereotypical Newfoundland town that you really have to see to believe. I'm sure if you're into water sports, jet skis and any kind of like ocean going craft, it's a great place to go. From when I was visiting last year, there was a lot of activity on the water from what looked to me to be small private vessels, but a lot to do in the amazingly beautiful town of Branch. And then when you come up around through Branch, if you stay kind of along the coast, you will meet up with the Irish Loop. When you hit the Irish Loop, eventually the Salmonair Line side of the Irish Loop, if you turn left or head north, when you hit that, you're going to work your way towards the city. But if you head south, you're now on the Irish Loop. I mean, technically you're still on the Irish Loop either way, but you'll head down south towards the towns of St. Vincent, St. Stephen's, eventually St. Shots into Trepassey. This region, this specific region from say St. Vincent's over as far as Trepassey, is going to blow your mind. If you're coming to Newfoundland for whales in particular, St. Vincent's is one of the hot spots. There's a couple, but the beach at St. Vincent's is probably, especially during the Capelin roll, is probably the place where you're going to see whales closest up to land. The beach, the Capelin rolls into the beach in numbers, which actually that in itself is worth seeing if you can time it out right. Happens in late spring, sometime in June typically, if I'm not mistaken. Please feel free to yell at me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I believe it's probably like early June typically. And Capelin is a very important food source for the humpback whales in the area, so they'll come up and dance around on the shore. It's a very famous spot for viewing that. If you head around from St. Vincent's around the southeast tip of the Avalon Peninsula, you'll come across St. Shots, Trepassey. I just made some videos about those two towns, particularly Trepassey, but I've shown shots of St. Shots, and I'm going to do it in this video again, reusing these beautiful shots. That's what you can do if you come in to Argentia. That's what I'm talking about, bringing it all back to folks that are arriving into the island from the port of Argentia. Head up the east side of the Irish Loop. You're now on the Southern Shore Highway, and I can't talk enough about the Southern Shore. It's the lighthouse grounds at Cape Race and the Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve. You got the towns heading all the way up to Fairyland, up through Bay Bulls, and everything in between. There's so many beautiful towns along an incredibly beautiful coastal drive with just going up and down hills with the ocean, with nothing beyond until you get to Portugal or Ireland, knowing that it's an amazing ride and it's beautiful. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it can be incredibly foggy in this area. So that's in itself is a bit of an attraction, but just keep in mind, sometimes you may not be able to see anything because the fog is going to be so thick you barely will be able to see outside your car window. But when you can see, it's probably the area with the most amazing views that you're going to see anywhere in the province, and that's saying a lot when we're talking about the island of Newfoundland. On the Burin Peninsula is one of the coolest things that literally nobody else in Canada can say is we share a border with France. Yes, 20% of Canada speaks French, but nobody in Quebec or in New Brunswick can claim to be on a border with France. We can. This is the border to St. Pierre and Miquelon from the town of Fortune on the Burin Peninsula. Now, staying in Carbonear, I'm going to recommend just taking a jaunt through Water Street on Carbonear. This was redone recently. They did a big dig, repairing like the sewer pipes and stuff, but they redid the street recently. And as far as I understand, the repairs are done and the street's back open for business, but the businesses that are on the street, that's the cool thing. This is like an old downtown of a pretty small town. The Carbonear is on the bigger side of towns for Newfoundland in terms of population, but it's still a small town. But they have a cool little downtown with restaurants and shops, and there's one of the shops there is actually ran by somebody named Mark Royal, which I thought was pretty cool. Definitely worth visiting. Carbonear is not that far from St. John, so if you want to get out of town, if you can't go too far, go to Carbonear, go to Water Street, go to that heritage village that I just mentioned a moment ago. And there's lots of other stuff. The Harbour Grace stuff that I mentioned, Harbour Grace is right next to Carbonear. There's kind of a lot there. This is an area of the province that I think there's a lot of cool stuff around there. So if you're there, stop by Water Street for your lunch or for your coffee or for whatever it is you're looking for. Now, if you are in Carbonear or in Victoria, if you hop across on the other side of that Bay de Verde Peninsula, you'll end up over around Cavendish. You'll end up in Heart's Content, which I mentioned earlier as well. But if you drive south of there, you'll end up in the town of Cavendish. And there's these 3 fishing sheds that are there. And I don't know if they were put there for tourism purposes, if they were there on this beach and then they just got spruced up. But there's a very famous photo of these sheds in the Newfoundland and Labrador tourism ads from a long time ago now. And I just really like them. I can't explain why. I just think they're cool, and it's a cool spot to stop and just get out of your car and take a few pictures. So it's the town of Cavendish, it's the fishing sheds. There's actually one of the sheds is a library, and I think there's other things in the other ones where you can go inside and see inside. But it's just a nice spot to get out and stretch and take some nice photos. Now head down to Placentia. I haven't mentioned much about this area of the Avalon Peninsula, sort of the southwest of the Cape Shore area. Now, Placentia is a little bit before the Cape Shore, but Placentia is home to a lift bridge that I don't think there's any other bridges like this in Newfoundland. And it's a beautiful town. I've talked about it in other videos, but the curiosity aspect for this section is that bridge. It's just something that really stands out and dominates the skyline of this little town. And you should go to Placentia for any number of reasons, Castle Hill, the town itself, but the bridge sort of stands out. You'll notice it if you're there, so I wanted to include this in this video. There's a big cemetery in the center of St. John's called Mount Pleasant Cemetery. This is a huge, beautiful cemetery tucked in behind a tree-lined neighborhood not far from the city's municipal depot on Black Marsh Road. If you're going there but you don't know where you're going, it's not really easy to find, but if you do find the entrance and follow that long driveway to get in, you enter a surprisingly large and open site that feels incredibly respectful of those who rest there. With all due respect to Joey Smallwood, this entry in the video has nothing to do with his gravesite, which occupies a prominent spot in this cemetery. I was much more interested in paying my respects to the beautiful Chinese memorial. This monument was actually unveiled in 1981, but I didn't even know it existed until I saw some stories about when it was refurbished about 2 years ago. The Chinese community in St. John's has grown significantly over the past decade or so, but it was strong for a century, despite a lot of hardships and injustice. St. John's owes a lot to the earliest Chinese immigrants who chose to settle in the city. This monument is a beautiful tribute to the Chinese community of Newfoundland. There have been a lot of remarkable visitors to the city from even just the 20th century alone. There are at least 2 memorials that are dedicated to people who came to St. John's and began amazing journeys from here. John Alcock and Arthur Brown. The monument to Alcock and Brown is located on La Marchant Road near the corner of Patrick Street. It's right across the street from St. Clair's Hospital. As far as monuments in the city go, it's pretty unremarkable. It's nice enough, I suppose, but it's basically just a plaque attached to a big concrete block. But the Alcock and Brown story is a cool one. It's about a competition to be the first person, or in this case people, to fly across the Atlantic. Now, by today's standards, it's obviously no big deal, but that's why these monuments are so important. It helps us remember a time when air travel was the frontier. And exciting events like this one that allow us to think of transatlantic travel as routine and mundane today deserve to be remembered. Alcock and Brown won that competition. They flew a plane across the Atlantic, landing in Ireland, and they took off from Leicester's Field in St. John's. Port Rexton is a beautiful town on the Bonavista Peninsula. I've talked about a few of the other towns just for the sake of them being beautiful. But Port Rexton is interesting to me because it has a thriving, very, very healthy brewery, the Port Rexton Brewery. And this is the type of place where, you'll find Port Rexton beer all around Newfoundland, but the brewery itself stays open throughout the year as far as I know, and it's busy. I've been there in the summer, but I've been there in the off season as well. And it'd be surprised at how busy it can be because it's in the middle of a very, very small town. But it's cool to see, rural Newfoundland. And in the town of Port Rexton, there's a few other things like this as well, where there's people taking chances on businesses that seem to be doing well, right? So Bonavista Peninsula in general is an example of this, but Port Rexton in particular with the brewery and with the Fisher's Loft and a few other businesses like that, really cool thing to see. Now, there's lots of shipwrecks located around the island of Newfoundland, and there's one more significant one, not that far from Harbour Grace, just up the road actually in Conception Harbour. It's the whaling ships. There's 3 of them. One of them still sticks out of the water a little bit more, but if you fly over it, you can see that there's 2 more that are kind of overgrown with seaweed or whatever it is. But same thing with the SS Kyle and Harbour Grace. They just kind of like broke off of their moorings and ran aground where they did, and this is where they will be forever until they completely deteriorate now. Just north of the town of Carbonear is the town of Victoria, and they have the Heritage Village there. The Heritage Village is, kind of like a pioneer village. They have some cool stuff built. It's for fun. It wasn't actually like this back in the day on the site, because the actual history is what makes it so fascinating to me. The actual history of this specific location is this was a real prisoner of war site during World War II. So you can go and enjoy the site for what it is now. Absolutely, it's cool. I really liked it. But just knowing what the site was before, going back 80 years now, that's what really grabbed my attention. Right? I think it's worth going to see for what it is now, but also knowing what you're walking on, what it used to be, what people used to walk on there. Right? Thanks so much for watching this one to the end. In the meantime, if you want to see some more beautiful footage about Newfoundland and hear me tell my stories, YouTube seems to think that you might also enjoy this video that's up here on the screen. I'll see you over there. Alright, see you, loves you, bye.